Thank you very much. It's an honor for me to be here and an honor to introduce the first person that I get to sit with and talk with, and that is Tom Price. He was first elected to Georgia's 6th District in 2004. He, since January, has been the chairman of the House Budget Committee. He's one of, we just counted 20 doctors in Congress. Before going into politics in Georgia, he was practicing as an orthopedic surgeon. Welcome, Tom Price.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Well, this is nice. Usually I'm chasing you down the hallways in Congress. This is much more civilized. Let's start with something that actually happened on the presidential campaign trail yesterday, and that was Chris Christie gave a big speech. And one of the things he said in New Hampshire is that he wants you and your fellow Republicans to do away with the budget caps, the sequester. What's your response to that?
Well, I want to thank the Peterson Foundation first for allowing me to join you all today, and thank you for hosting this. Look, the budget caps, as bad as they are, across the board reductions, is the first modicum of spending restraint that we've had in this town in a long time. So I'm all in favor of doing away with the budget caps, so long as we can do so in a way that's fiscally responsible from a spending standpoint. If we're able to find mandatory savings that are real, that aren't accounting gimmicks, that get us on a better path to be able to balance the budget, then we're all in favor of that. To just do away with the caps, however, without other spending restraint, other spending discipline, doesn't make any sense at all from the big picture, which is that we're over $18 trillion in debt. We're on a path to be able to be spending over $1 trillion a year annually on interest on the debt. That's not a path that allows for the great economic vitality of this country.
Let's talk about your budget. You, thanks to the fact that you have fellow Republicans now in charge in the Senate, you were actually able to do a joint budget for the first time in five years?
Depends how you measure it. There are different metrics. From our standpoint, it's a balanced budget that balances within a 10-year period of time. That's the first agreement since 2001 with the Senate that we've had.
So, that's no small task. Right. But now you have to get into, I know you did your job as budget chair by setting the parameters, but now the question is going to be how that's implemented. And whether or not the various spending bills are going to actually see the light of day when it comes to the president, because the president has already said that he's going to veto many of them because he doesn't like the fact that you have increased defense spending but not domestic programs along with it. So are we heading for yet another showdown? Am I going to be standing in the hallway the clock is striking midnight talking about careening to another crisis?
Boy, I sure hope not.
Me too.
What the president has said, issuing his veto threats for any appropriations bill that spends at the level of the law, really remarkable when you think about it. So the president is saying we're going to veto any appropriations bill that spends at the level of the law right now. That's the sequester cap. Now I don't believe that's responsible. What we need to do is sit down together and figure out how we're going to work through this. From the defense standpoint, the defense folks at both the Pentagon and individuals who are very knowledgeable about where we stand right now in the world and the resources that are necessary to accomplish the mission, at least minimally, tell us that there needs to be more resources for the Department of Defense. And so, working within the law, we felt it was necessary to find another avenue to be able to fund defense at an appropriate level. We found that through the Global War on Terror Fund, or the OCO Fund, the Overseas Contingency Operations Fund. We would ask the administration, have asked the administration to work with us. If you're not a fan of how we solved the challenge that we have, then let's get together and work together and make certain that we can move in the right direction and provide the resources for the Pentagon to be able to provide national security at a very, very challenging time.
Do you think that is realistic, since for the past 7 years everyone's been talking past each other?
I think it's possible. Realistic will come when I see more activity, but I think it's possible. There are folks within the administration who've made comments about the imperative of finding that common ground. We haven't heard it out of the president's mouth yet, but we hope we will soon. But look, these are huge, huge challenges. And on the discretionary side, we have kept funding relatively level for the past 4 years. And when I get folks all the time coming into my office wanting more money for this, more money for that, making certain that we have the kind of resources we need for research and development. NIH has been an issue of late. And I'm all in favor of the vast majority of these things. But in order to do that, we've got to reform the entitlements, the Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, which are 2/3 of the spending here in Washington. If we don't get those under control, we're always going to be challenged on the discretionary side because the entitlement spending grows and grows and grows because of the changing demographics of our society. So we've got 10,000 folks reaching retirement age every single day. They're accessing both Medicare and Social Security. Both of those programs are on a path to insolvency within a relatively short period of time. And so they've got to be reformed in a positive way.
I want to ask you about entitlements because mandatory spending, I mean, that's the whole game here.
Right.
I mean, that's it. But because you mentioned OCO, which is kind of Washington speak for a lot of people, for a budgetary gimmick, the kind of gimmick that Republicans swore that they were not going to do when you all took control in 2010, because you're raising spending for the Defense Department with what a lot of people, and Democrats and Republicans, call imaginary funds.
Well, it's not imaginary funds. It's just off budget, meaning that it's not included within the discretionary cap, the $1.016 trillion that we have for fiscal year 16. It's real money. It's just that it's not included in the cap. We believe it ought to be included under the cap, and that's where we would like to work with the administration on moving those things that are off budget on budget.
So it's not offset.
Well, none of it that's offset, yeah. but it's not on budget. It's not included in the defense discretionary or the non-defense discretionary cap. It's an important distinction, and it's an appropriate criticism of how we're moving through the spending here in Washington.
Because it's $40 billion. It's not a small chunk of change, right?
Well, it's actually 96 for FY16, but it's about a $40 billion increase over where it was in FY15. Mm-hmm. Now, it's also important to appreciate that the world's changed. It continues to be a very dangerous world, and more so of late. And so the resources, again, that we need to accomplish the mission are what we ought to be looking at. We ought not be fitting our defense budget into just the numbers. We ought to be asking, what is the mission? What is it that we need to accomplish? And then finding the resources to be able to do that.
You correct me if I'm wrong, but you, on your budget, only lost about 17 Republicans on the vote, which, given the track record for Republicans, is pretty good.
Yeah,
I mean, you're since you took over, have been pretty split on a lot of these economic votes and fiscal votes.
It was a big unifier for us. We had 17 Republicans vote no on the Republican budget when it came through the House the first time, 12 vote no on the agreement with the Senate. So appropriate concerns, obviously, but it was a big unifier. And I think an important message for the nation to hear, and that is that Congress can work together. We can move toward positive solutions. And I think you're feeling a little better sense of optimism out there.
Well, but no Democrats voted for it. Republicans are finally working together, sure. But not Democrats, which brings me back to what you brought up, which is so critical, entitlement reform and dealing finally with mandatory spending.
Yes.
Everybody says it's necessary. Democrats, Republicans of all stripes, all flavors. But when it comes to doing the really tough things that you need to do, whether it's Democrats wanting to raise taxes, whether it's Republicans agreeing to change the retirement age or means testing or what have you, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I mean, we saw, an attempt at the grand bargain with John Boehner and Barack Obama, and we can talk for 3 hours about why that went wrong. But where we are is where we are. So going forward, how do you see that actually being done and not just talked about?
It's all about leadership, and it's all about communication. And what we've tried to do, all I know how to do is try to lead by example. What we've tried to do is to broach those conversations with folks on the other side of the aisle, yes, but also folks in the administration, to begin to see whether or not there is some common ground that we can get to. The American people, frankly, don't care whether it's a Republican solution or a Democratic solution. They want a solution, and they want folks to work together here in this town. And the challenges are huge from an economic standpoint. We've got to get this economy growing. Congressional Budget Office over the last 3 years has downgraded the prediction of our growth from 3 to 2.9 to 2.5 to 2.3. Average over the last 40 years is 3.3% growth. If we just had that 1%, increase in growth, we would see over $3 trillion of increased revenue coming to the federal treasury because of the increased economic vitality in the country. They're wonderful things that we ought to be looking at, and hopefully we'll be able to come to some meeting of the minds on that.
Do you think that the deal that Nancy Pelosi and John Boehner made, which was news in and of itself, that they actually were talking on the phone and negotiating something that of great import, which is the doc fix or SGR, that could be a model for, never mind the actual substance of it, but just the basic getting to the table, Democrats and Republicans?
Well, that was important because folks did come to the table, and I think the take-home message on that is that once it came to the floor for a vote, over 390 members of the House voted for it, over 90 members of the United States Senate voted
remarkable.
for it, which is phenomenal. I mean, you think, well, why didn't it happen before?
Yeah.
And again, it's all about leadership and all about
because they actually talk to each other.
That's exactly
Imagine
right.
what happens when you actually have a conversation with the other side.
Leadership and communication, and that's the imperative. But I think that both of those things, our budget and then the SGR repeal that occurred in a bipartisan way, have set a much more collegial tone in this town. There's a better sense. I was talking with some folks back home yesterday at a noon luncheon, and the opening comment from them was, it feels like things are beginning to move a little bit. We're breaking that logjam in Washington. Is it true? And they were very hopeful that it was. So I hope that we'll be able to have that conversation and move forward on these other issues about how you mitigate the concerns on the defense side, but also how you deal with the cap spending, how you find the common ground on the entitlement reform, on the mandatory spending reform.
And you're personally going to be faced with that in what, eight months, right? I mean, another glimmer of hope was Paul Ryan and Patty Murray. How long ago was it now? 2 years ago?
2 years.
I'm losing track of time.
Yeah.
That they came together in a bipartisan way for a 2-year budget deal. Now you've taken over the reins of the Budget Committee. Is there going to be a Murray-Ryan 2.0, or I guess it would be Price-Sanders? Is that possible?
Price, Sanders, Enzi, Van Hollen.
I'd like to sit down in those conversations.
They've been fascinating. They really have. They've been, and I think hold a key to some wonderfully productive result. Again, the challenges are significant. We know that the path we're on right now is not the path that we need to stay on, either from a spending standpoint on the discretionary side or an ignoring of the mandatory spending side. So I think there's an opportunity to get this done. I'm an eternal optimist, and all I know is that you got to keep working at it.
But take us inside. Those conversations are already happening?
Well, they're informal at this point, because you got to crawl before you can walk and walk before you can run. But there isn't a soul in this town who doesn't believe that these issues don't need to be addressed, and need to be addressed in a positive way, again, that gets our economy growing. At the end of the day, we can't cut ourselves to prosperity. We can't tax ourselves to prosperity. The only way to increase the prosperity in this country and the economic opportunity for individuals all across this land is to grow the economy, and that's where we hope the common ground is.
Okay, we only have a little more than 2 minutes left, and I want to ask you about Obamacare. As part of your budget, you all put in reconciliation, which allows you to, if you choose to, repeal Obamacare with the Senate with a minimum of 51 votes, a regular majority, which we should note is the same way that Democrats actually passed it, using that same process. But the whole question has been, beyond repeal, what are you going to replace it with? And you should have credit where credit is due, that you actually are one of the few people to come up every year with a plan. You reintroduced it, I believe, this week.
Yes.
Philosophically, it's quite different from what most Democrats would support. But just if you can talk a little bit about what your plan is to replace Obamacare, and how you actually see any of those points as a point of common ground with any Democrats.
Well, I think Obamacare, the ACA, will have to be replaced because it doesn't work. Doesn't work for patients and docs, it doesn't work for employers and employees, and it certainly doesn't work for states or the federal government from a financing standpoint. So whether it's soon or whether it's later, we are in a transition in healthcare to a different kind of system. And what we've tried to do is to say, okay, what are the principles of healthcare that all of us, regardless of our political stripe, hold dear? Everybody wants a system that's affordable for all, that's accessible for all, that's of the highest quality, that allows patient choices about who's treating them where and when. And if you move in the direction of a plan that respects those principles, then you come up with something that looks like in the Empowering Patients First Act, H.R. 2300,
which
is a bill that we
effectively is
introduced.
moving it out of the employer's lane.
It equalizes the tax treatment for employers and individuals so that it's agnostic on that. We believe it would move toward the individual because that's where the authority is, that's where the power is. But we have a plan that would get everybody covered across this country with coverage that they want for themselves and their families, not that the government forces them to buy. A plan that addresses the insurance challenges of portability and pre-existing. We ought to make certain that folks don't lose their insurance if they change their job or they lose their job. And nobody ought to be priced out of the market. If you get a bad diagnosis, that's a system that may work for government or insurance companies. It doesn't work for people. It's a system that also would save hundreds of billions of dollars through robust lawsuit abuse reform. H.R. 2300 is the bill, the Empowering Patients First Act, and we're trying to rally troops around that. We've got over 50 co-sponsors so far, and as I say, the current plan, the current law is unworkable and won't be what we have in this nation in 3, 5, or 7 years. How quickly we move to a transition and a new plan is the only question.
And we have a Supreme Court decision that might sort of jumpstart this debate.
Very possible with King
Anyway,
v. Burwell at the end of June. That's correct.
We're out of time. Thank you so
Oh,
much,
thank you.
Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the discussion.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I believe
Am I
we
gone?
have a short video that we're going to play as we exit the stage. Thank you.